Before we begin, this series has dealt directly with school violence, teacher trauma, mental health crisis, and the aftermath of a student's murder on the school campus. This final episode goes to some of the hardest places this story has to go. If you're in a vulnerable place, please take care of yourself first. For those of you who have been with me since episode 1, I thank you. Let's finish this together. Welcome back to Reclaim the Room. I'm Howard, and this is episode 5 of the Out of the Flame series. If you've been with me since the beginning, since the lockdown, since the buses, since the Oreos, since the letter, getting to this episode required more than recording. It requires surviving what came after the letter. And that's what this episode is about. Episode 4 was the decision, the resignation, the clarity that sat under the grief of walking away from 15 plus years of a profession I'd built my identity around. I left with clarity and without regret. That was true. What I didn't tell you and what I didn't have the language for yet was what happened after the clarity. Because when I resigned, my body didn't register the relief. My mind didn't know how to exhale. I was still stuck in the hallways of March 10th, waiting for the next emergency that wasn't coming. I was still replaying the trauma, trying to sleep through the night. That's where this episode begins. Not with the decision, with what the decision left behind. I didn't notice what was happening to me at first. I held an assumption about myself that someone with my background, my self-awareness, my years of working in environments that required me to read other people's emotional states would be able to recognize when something was happening to her own mind. I couldn't. The people who saw it were the ones who loved me. My husband Gary, my mother, my daughters. The people who were close enough and paying enough attention to watch something shift in me that I was either unable or unwilling to see in myself. I don't know exactly what they saw first. What I know is by the time they said something, whatever they were seeing had been building for a while. Trauma does that. It accumulates, it settles into your posture and your sleep and your willingness to answer the phone. It makes itself at home before you even realize it's moved in. And by the time the people who loved me named what they were seeing, I was deep enough into it that a part of me wanted to argue with them. The same part that had been showing up to a building after a student was murdered and smiling in the hallway and calling it a normal Tuesday. That part doesn't go quietly just because you finally resign. I lost my faith. Not drifted, not doubted in the ordinary way that faith moves through seasons. I lost it. The framework that had held my life together, that had structured how I understood suffering, purpose, protection, and the goodness of God, collapsed under the weight of what I'd witnessed and what I was still carrying. How could a true and just God allow this to happen? That's the question I couldn't answer. And when I couldn't answer it, I stopped being able to hold the belief that had always been the foundation of who I was. I'm a Christian. Faith is not peripheral to my identity. It is load bearing. And when it went, something structural went with it. A murdered child and a just God couldn't coexist in the belief system I built. And I didn't know how to rebuild it around what I lived through. For every person of faith who has ever been through something so wrong, so preventable, so catastrophic that their theology couldn't absorb it, you're not weak for losing your footing. You're not faithless for asking how. The question is not a failure of belief. The question is what happens when belief meets something that it was not built to hold. I'm still working through this. I won't stand here and tell you I've arrived back at the faith I had before March 10th, because I haven't. What I can tell you is that I'm in the work of rebuilding, not the same structure, but something. And I'm not doing it alone. At some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when because time moves differently inside a depression that deep. I stopped leaving my bedroom, not just the house, the bedroom. I'm a woman who spent 15 years walking into chaotic, understaffed, under-resourced buildings every single day and still functioning. I have broken up fights, stood between flying furniture and my students, held classrooms together through things that would have broken a lot of people, and I was in my bedroom. unable to cross the threshold into the rest of my own house in any sustained way. That's how far the radius of my life has shrunk. And it wasn't just the house. Going anywhere that had people in it, a restaurant, a grocery store, anywhere children might be present was unbearable in a way I couldn't have predicted and could not explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. Being around children specifically was something I wasn't prepared for, because every child I saw was a reminder of a child who was not there anymore. And my nervous system had not gotten the menu that the emergency was over. So it was the bedroom. And when it absolutely had to be more than a bedroom, it was a careful, deliberate negotiation with my own anxiety about whether I could get through without coming apart. At some point, at the point where the bedroom had become the whole world, I asked for help. Not because I suddenly felt brave, because I had reached the end of what I could manage alone and I knew it. What followed was months of referrals that went nowhere. Psychiatrists accepting new patients. Psychologists with waiting lists that stretched out past any reasonable definition of urgent. This is what mental health care access looks like for someone in crisis. You reach the moment where you are finally willing to say, I need help, and the system tells you to keep waiting. You reach for help and the system hands you a referral list. That's not care. That's managed neglect wearing a costume of a process. And then there was the day the depression was at its absolute worst. The kind of pain that's not dramatic. It's quiet and consuming, and it doesn't announce itself. It just sits there pressing down on everything. I called my doctor. I told her what was happening, and we went back and forth for hours. Her telling me what the next referral was, me telling her that I'd been through the referrals, that they were not moving, that I was not okay. Finally, I said, though I'm not suicidal, and yes, I did start with that, I'm going to drive to the military hospital nearby and walk into their lobby and tell them if they do not help me, I will blow my brains out right there. I meant it as a statement of desperation, not as a threat. I was telling her what I was willing to do to make someone take this seriously. Only then, after hours of back and forth, after months of referrals that led nowhere, did she finally understand the depth of what was happening. Only then did something move. I kept trying, and eventually I got in. I found a therapist, I found a psychiatrist, and the work began. My psychologist and my psychiatrist gave names to what was happening to me. Major depressive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety. 3 diagnoses spoken out loud by professionals who had evaluated me, sitting in a room where I finally told someone everything. My first response was not relief. My first response was, I must really be crazy. That's the response a lot of people have when a mental health diagnosis lands on them for the first time, and the shame attached to that response does enormous damage. I spent my entire adult life as the person who held it together, the competent one, the one who showed up. And now there were 3 clinical names for what was happening inside me, and something in me interpreted those names as evidence that I had fundamentally broken in a way that could not be prepared. That's not what they meant. It took me a while to understand that, but eventually, through therapy, through the work, through the medication regimen that has given me something I hadn't had in a long time, eventually I came to understand something that has become one of the most important things I know. If I can name it, I can fight it. The diagnosis is not the sentence. The diagnosis is the beginning of the case. MDD, PTSD, anxiety. These are not the end of my story. Those are the names of what March 10th and everything that followed did to a human body and mind that were not designed to absorb that kind of sustained trauma without support. And they're treatable. I'm proof of that. Not healed, I want to be precise about that word, but grounded in a way I wasn't 6 months ago. Functional in a way that the bedroom didn't allow. Present in a way that the black hole made impossible. I'm on a medication regimen that's working. I'm in therapy. I'm doing the work, and I'm still here. I have to talk about my husband. Gary saved me, not as a figure of speech, as a precise description of what happened. When the faith was gone and the bedroom was the world and the diagnoses were sitting on my chest like something I would never get out from under, Gary stayed. He didn't manage my crisis from a comfortable distance. He walked in it with me, and he didn't leave. He told me the hard things. Although it would have been easier in the short term for him to let me stay in the comfortable unreality of not fully acknowledging how far down I'd gone. He hadn't done that. He loved me enough to be honest with me when honesty was the last thing I thought I wanted. He said what needed to be said, and because he said it, I heard it. He has walked every step of this with me. When I get overwhelmed, when anxiety spikes and the ground stops feeling solid and I'm back at what feels like day one, he grounds me. Not with solutions, not with a plan, with presence. Sometimes a simple touch. With the particular steadiness of someone who's decided without conditions that he's not going anywhere. He loved me back to life. That's not a metaphor. That's what happened. Before the therapist, before the psychiatrist, before the medication that gave me my footing back, there was a man who refused to let me disappear. Gary. Thank you, baby. I know you'll hear this. I love you. The wound is still open, the place where anxiety and depression still find their way back in, even on the days when everything else seems to be holding. I don't want to go back to teaching. That part I made peace with. But I've not been able to figure out who I am outside of it. And that question, that absence, that blank space where an identity used to be is the thing that I'm sitting in. For more than 15 years, I was a teacher, not just professionally, fundamentally. It's how I understood my purpose, my value, my place in the world. It was the lens through which I made sense of almost everything. And now it's gone. Not because I stopped being capable, because a system broke something in me that teaching cannot repair, and because I'm not willing to walk back into that building and pretend otherwise. But here's the part that nobody talks about when they talk about leaving a vocation, especially a vocation that people have told you your whole career was a calling from God. When you leave, you don't just lose the job, you lose the story you were living inside. And I've spent the better part of a year trying to figure out who I am when that story's over. I think I may have answered a call to the wrong number, and I don't know yet what the right one is. Everyone told me I was called to teach. I believed that. I built 15 years of my life on that belief, and now I'm sitting with the possibility that the call I answered was not the one God intended, or that the season of it is simply over, or that what I was called to do is bigger than the classroom ever allowed me to be. And I don't know which one of those is true. Maybe all of them, maybe none of them. What I know is that I want to make an impact. That hasn't changed. The students I love, the educators who are still in the buildings that are not protecting them, the systemic failures that are still happening to someone right now, I care about all of it. I'm not done caring, but I have not yet found the shape that caring is supposed to take outside of the classroom. And the not knowing, that's where the anxiety lives. That's where the depression finds its opening. That's what still feels like failing. This series ends in truth rather than resolution. The truth is where you are. That is where I'm meeting you. There's no tidy ending because there's not one yet. This series is called Out of the Flames, and I've been ending every episode the same way. Out of the flames, I'm still here. Still here doesn't mean that I'm healed. It doesn't mean resolved. It doesn't mean I found the answer to the question of who I am outside of the classroom or rebuilt the faith I lost or stop having those days where the black hole opens up and I sit in it for a while before I can find my way out. Still here means I'm alive. It means I'm in treatment and the treatment is working. It means I have a husband who refused to let me disappear and a family who saw the crisis before I could, and daughters who need me to come back to myself. It means I made it through the bedroom, through the waiting list, through the diagnoses, through the moment I called my doctor and told I was willing to through the moment I called my doctor and told her what I was willing to do to make someone hear me. Still here means I recorded this episode, all 5 of them. I sat down and I told this story, the whole story, not the edited version, not the version that makes the institution look like it tried, not the version where grief is tidy and recovery is linear and the ending is clean. The real one. And that requires something of me that I was not sure I had until I found out I did. Still here is not a destination, it is a daily decision. And today I made it. To every educator who's still in a building that's not protecting them, I see you. To every educator who's asking whether they should go back, who's sitting in the question I sat with last summer, I see you. To every educator who's lost something to the profession that cannot be returned, who's lost their health, their faith, their sense of self, their love of the work, I see you. You're not imagining it. You're not weak. You're carrying something the system was never designed to help you carry. And you've been doing it alone for too long. You don't have to keep going. You also don't have to quit today. But you do have to tell yourself the truth, whatever that truth may be, the way I finally told mine. This has been the Out of the Flame series. 5 episodes. One story, my story, and yours if any part of it resonates with you. Season 2 of Reclaim the Room is coming. There's more to say. There are other voices that need to be heard. This isn't the end of the conversation, it's the end of the chapter. I'm Howard. This is Reclaim the Room. I'm still here.